Are you wondering how to break the stigma around mental health issues and the impact that it's having on our African American and other disenfranchised communities? If you are, join us, your hosts, Marincia Henson, Lucretia Lee, and Walanda Johnson on our Mindful Moments mental health radio show every second and fourth Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, as we dive into a mindful dialogue to empower, inform, and bring awareness to the positive impact of mental health wellness.
Good evening, everyone. I am one of your hosts, Marincia Henson. Thank you again for joining us. I am an associate clinical social worker here in San Diego. I provide therapeutic as well as social services for children, adolescents, and adults that have mental health disorders as well as intellectual disabilities here in San Diego. And with us, we have Lucretia Lee.
Hello, I'm Lucretia Lee. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I work here at one of our local detention facilities for men. And what I do is I assess for suicide ideology.
And I am Walanda Johnson, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist who is licensed in the state of California. However, I provide teletherapy as I am not living in the state and I'm on the East Coast. I serve adults, mainly dealing with anxiety, life issues, life stressors, and such.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Well, thank you again for joining us. If anyone that doesn't know, this month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Yes. So for this evening, we're going to be having a mindful dialogue on domestic violence. So I'm not sure if many of you all know exactly what is domestic violence or what it looks like, in the sense that there's different forms of domestic violence. And once again, I think it's important to be very clear to know what is DV. So DV is basically it's systematic patterns of power and control towards that victim, whether you're in a relationship with that person, or if it's someone that you even know, whether it's a family member, a coworker, a mate. So one of the types is physical abuse, verbal, emotional, psychological. We also have sexual abuse, and then we also have financial abuse that we'll be diving into as well.
So as we begin to share different types of abuse, we're going to be covering signs and different specific types, and you'll find that many of those things overlap. Just before we start sharing, I just want to say that some of the things that we may share, you may not agree with, or you may not consider abuse. As a matter of fact, you may even have seen yourself in some of these things. Maybe you've done some of these things on one level or another. I'd just like to say that, most things pushed to a particular degree can look very different, So for example, checking someone's phone, to see if they have any callers. Someone might say, well, I've done that before. But then I think it's the level of it and what you define as abuse. And so just kind of take it with a grain of salt. We're not here to offend, we're here to educate. And so if you find yourself that you've experienced any of these types of things, or someone who has, then once you know better, you can do better.
Yeah. I think it's important to keep in mind, like Mimi was saying, like Marincia was saying, it's about power and control. If your partner, your intimate partner violence, DV is also known as intimate partner violence. If that person is doing things to control how you respond to them, if they're using it in a way to exert their power in the relationship, that is a clear indicator that they are engaging in domestic violence actions.
Another thing that's important to share, I used to work for San Diego Probation Department, working with juveniles, and it's important to allow our viewers to know the rise of domestic violence within teenagers, the relationships. So majority of the time, it's a learned behavior, right? So majority of the time, it's because that teenager has seen their mother or their father being abused or being the victim or the perpetrator. So I think it's very key to even address the DV that goes along with teens dating, And
Absolutely.
starting young, you know. And I think another thing that's important to me to address is how when abuser is looking for their victim per se, they will do things, they will say things to see what type of person they are. So many of times, if they know I can take advantage of this person because they're psychologically, maybe they're weak, right? So they may have a low self-esteem, lack of confidence. You know, they're lurking, they're seeing, okay, well, if I shrub her or him, right? Because it does go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Is he or she, I'm like, hey, y'all need to like back off. Like, what are you doing? Why are you touching me? Or they're gonna figure out, oh, well, I pushed him or her once, she didn't do nothing. Then it's a punch, then it's a slap, and then they increase that, right? And the same thing with emotional, or mental, or financial abuse. So they definitely want, and they do try to test to see if they even have boundaries or lack of boundaries to see what they can get from that person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would talk a lot. I used to run DV groups for the for offenders in the military. And that's what we would talk about, crossing the line. Like there's a line that you draw, and then someone, when one person decides to cross that line, and whether it starts off as name calling, or it starts off as, you know, I might not punch you, but I might punch a wall. The military has their identification of symptoms, or symptoms are a lot higher than they would be in the civilian world. But, you know, things like that. So yeah, I might not punch you, I might punch a wall. But I'm still doing it to scare you into doing what I need, to intimidate you into doing what I need you to do. So, but yeah, crossing that line, like it starts off with, oh, you're a B, or you're an a-hole, or whatever, you know, and it just kind of ratchets up from there.
Mm-hmm. And I know you guys talked about how we identified intimate partner violence. And again, that can be woman to man, man to woman, woman to woman, man to man. It can be adult to child, child to child, you know. So I think a lot of the examples that we'll share in our mind, you know, we're connoting intimate partner violence, but just keep in mind that these can spread across the board. It can definitely spread across the board, and it doesn't just have to be, you know, man, woman, or what have you. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I know we talked about different areas that we might want to cover. Marissa, you want to start off by talking about some of the ones that most people have heard about or more familiar with?
Yeah, I think again, you know, when it comes to domestic violence, I think a lot of times people automatically think it's physical as well as psychological, but I think it's really important to discuss the economic or financial abuse. And what does that look like? You know, so again, like many of us may or may not know, it's described as threatening or otherwise limiting the victim's financial freedom or security. And what that can look like, let's just say someone's in a relationship or even a marriage, and the abuser is like, you know what, I'm going to have access, and I'm only going to allow myself to have access to our bank account. So let's just say that partner doesn't have a job, maybe lack of education, you know, really doesn't have family as support, or their abuser has eliminated him or her to even have access to that support. A lot of times the victim's like, how am I gonna get out of the situation? I have no money, I have no access to my money. He's allowed me to veer off of not having any type of, you know, restrictions of who I can see, who I cannot see. So many of times the victim feels terrified to even try to leave, because they're literally controlling them even financially, where they don't even feel like they can save money to leave that person eventually. So again, you know, what does that look like when it comes to that financial gain? It's exactly what it is. I'm going to control. I'm not going to allow you to have the password to our checking or savings account. I'm going to give you a certain amount of money of when you can spend it, where you can spend it, as well as putting them down. So again, I think it's important to know that abuser can use different forms. So again, that financial control, and then let's just say the wife's like, well, you know what, I really need to get groceries. And then psychologically, he or she's like, well, are you really going to the grocery store, or are you going to cheat on me? So then now it's that emotional abuse. It's that abuse of putting that person down when he or she's like, no, but I'm really going to the grocery store. And then on top of that, it could be that physical abuse where now, before she can even get out the door, now he or she is hitting her. So there you go. You get that mental, emotional, and that financial abuse all in one.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to share something about the financial abuse. And one of the examples it reads, refuses to contribute to shared expenses such as rent, food, childcare. Now, this really stood out to me professionally as well as personally. I know several couples, women in particular, who have shared with me that in terms of finances in the home, these are married couples, that there's certain bills and stuff that they pay for and certain things that their husband pay for. And however, you decide to break down your finances, whatever floats your boat, floats your boat. But what stood out to me over the years, like I said, knowing certain women and also as a therapist, is when I've met many women who said they take care of the finances that pertain to the children. So that might be childcare, school clothes, lunch money, and things like that. And oftentimes, many of these women have shared that they've come up short during the month. In other words, they don't have enough money to take care of their agreed expenses. Their husbands make more, and the wife or the woman happens to have more financial responsibility. And so they're not eating lunch at work, or the children have clothes that are subpar. And, and basically what's been shared with me is like, well, we agree that I take care of the kids and anything pertaining to the kids. And so that means that the child is sick. The woman is staying home to take care of the kid because she takes care of the kids. So if she doesn't have any time on the books in terms of work, that's the way it works. And so, that can be a form of abuse as well. When the woman or the partner finds that they don't have enough money to meet their needs. They're in a family, and the family, if you look at the finances altogether, they're doing great. But when it comes down to what kind of vehicle they're driving, or if they're driving a vehicle at all, and their needs being met personally, as well as the children, sometimes the wife and the children come up short.
Yeah. We find this, like, again, like San Diego's a military, town. You find that a lot with military families. You have, the culture of the military are mainly people who may have come from lower income families. So like, they're coming here, they marry somebody, they marry young. That person may have, their partner may have an education, they may not. And then with the military, you go different places, right? So every time you go somewhere, if you're a spouse, you have to find another job, or you don't work. It just depends on, whatever the family dynamic is. But you see that a lot where,
Right.
the service member is the main breadwinner, and the spouse may not be working. They may be home taking care of the kids, because childcare, especially in California, is super expensive.
Right.
So you find that, they may not tell their spouses. We had a lot of cases where they weren't telling their spouses how much money they weren't sharing income with them, not sharing like how much money they made. And granted, like, you could do that with your own family, but if it comes to the point where your family is struggling, your children, again, like, aren't being fed, she's having to ask for money. Like, these are things that, the military culture prides itself in taking care of their families. The service members weren't really upholding to that.
Right.
And their wives were like struggling, and living in San Diego is not cheap. So, I mean, but even just struggling with the basic needs, and just not knowing where that money was coming from and when it was going to be in the family.
And Walanda, I have a question. In terms of the military families, did the wives, did they have like, Fleet and Family Services, could they ask for help, or if they asked for help, would it look bad on their husband as not being a provider? What was your experience?
I mean, both. So, I mean, there are a lot of resources. Fleet and Family Services has a lot of resources. They do have, the thing with the resources though, is that the spouse, like, they will let the service member know that the spouse came in and asked for this amount of money. So it's going to get back to that command. And especially if it's seen as, abuse, that's going to get back to, there's a case open and it goes up the chain and all of that stuff. There's a whole procedure with it I'm not going to go into, but there are resources for spouses, wives and husbands. If that is happening, if there's any kind of abuse that's going on, there are resources that are available for them to get the help that they need. And their partner may get in quote unquote trouble. It depends on the idea is that the command will speak to that individual.
Sure.
Now the extent of that punishment or consequence is, up to the command, but it is brought up the chain.
Okay.
And at the same time, I would also think that maybe the mother, of the children or the partner, whoever, is even afraid to tell somebody.
Absolutely.
Because I may get hurt when he comes back home. That's our livelihood. That's our finances. So if he gets in trouble, I have no degree. Or maybe I do have a degree, but like you said, I'm in a different country. I don't have no family here. How are we going to put food on the table? So many of times I'm even assuming that they will just swallow everything that's going on within themselves, suck it up, which is really sad, instead of really getting the resources and the help that they may need. Because at the end of the day, she's looking at her own well-being, like, what's going to happen to me and my children when he comes back home and he finds out that I shared with somebody outside of our family what was going on. And again, it's just really sad because, it's the children that are affected, right? They're seeing
Absolutely
what's going on. They're hearing the screaming and the hurting behind closed doors, afraid of what's going on with their mother or with their father. And at the same time, now that he's 10, 11, 12, he's liking a young girl. So in his head, right, psychologically, he's like, okay, well, if I've seen my dad, for an example, talk to my mom this way, I've seen my dad hurt my mom, then he's automatically going to think, because he's just naive, right? Oh, this is how I'm supposed to treat my girlfriend or somebody that I like. And, it's so important to know the signs, even as a social worker. If we're working as a social worker in a high school or in a middle school, and we're seeing things that are off where, a young male is grabbing the girl's arm, like, you better get over here. And she's taking it as a social worker, as a therapist, we need to address that. And how do we address that? If we have a meeting with the parents, and then, when the child gets home, now he's being abused, and the cycle continues. So I think it's even very critical as a professional to know how to go around it, to not only keep the child safe, but even anybody else that's in that home.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that pattern is so real, even in running the groups that I was fortunate to be able to be a part of, is just hearing the stories of my group was male. We did have a female group as well, but hearing the stories of these people that are now abusers, they're labeled as abusers in their cases, and hearing the stories that how they learned about anger, how they grew up in their families, because there were plenty of service women that were like, well, my grandma, she was chasing her husband around with pots and pans and throwing hot grits, and that was just normal. Right. So it's so interesting, and I know, like, we see the abuser and we see them in this light, and traditionally, like, as clinicians, we know that there's more to the story. But even just knowing, like, they had a history and they had an experience, and that was normal to them, and they don't know anything different. Not that it makes it right, but knowing that there's also a healing that needs to take place there too.
So what I've even seen, and I'll just say this in my personal and professional life, is someone who was abused in their family, or they saw their parent be abused, and as an adult, they're not the abuser, but because they had no control in their childhood, they want to control every marriage, or not every marriage, but they want to control their spouse in their marriage, whether it's a woman or a male. They want to control their relationship consciously and subconsciously, because to them, it's like, when I was growing up, I had no control. I had no control if I was safe or not. I had no control of my father abusing my mother. I had no control of what I was hearing, what I was experiencing within that trauma, within that PTSD diagnosis, again, undiagnosed, right? So now you're a grown woman, you're strong, you're empowered, you got your education, like, I'm going to protect myself mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, because as I was growing up, I couldn't feel safe in my own home. So I experienced it where these women or these men want to control their marriage. They want to control their relationship with their spouse or their boyfriends, or their girlfriends, because it's like, now that I'm an adult, I'm going to control it. Because if I can control it, that means I can feel safe. That means nobody can hurt me. But at the same time, it's like, that's still an abuse. Like, I mean, that's still abusing that person, because you don't feel safe to relinquish that control and to feel calm, to feel safe in your husband's arms, or to feel safe in whoever your partner is. So I've seen the opposite, where it's more that psychological control, because you never had that control growing up. And it's sad. And it's not until you can really, have a therapist and dig deep to know, like, where's the control coming from?
Yeah, absolutely.
To figure out where it's coming from. And then it's like, wow, it's not even what my husband said to me, right? It's not even what my wife said to me, or what he or she did. It was something that triggered something that I experienced in the past that allowed me to be defensive, or to allow me to want to control something because of what was going on.
As we're talking, I was thinking about different types of abuse that I've actually had the opportunity to work with. I remember when I was in college, and one of the research projects I worked on, it was about domestic violence and resilience.
Wow.
And so, it was, I don't know, to me, it was quite an honor to be a part of the journey, because what happened is that I was able to contact different shelters, the shelters that, that are not known to folks, and to explain what we were researching and the purpose of the research. And I was invited to come in and interview women who were in hiding. And one lady in particular stood out to me, and I never forgot it, because it just let me it just always reinforced the realm of how far domestic violence reaches. So we can have people who are, we might establish what, consider uneducated, cruel, just, grew up in abuse, and now they're delivering abuse. But then we have those who are very educated and who have influence and who are respected. So this particular lady in particular, she was from down south. This is what she said, down south somewhere. She was the first lady of a pastor of, we didn't say the word mega back then. It wasn't a mega church, but it was a huge church, and very well respected. And so she described, these were her words, that she would feel that her husband was disrespecting her, emotionally abusing her by allowing different women in the congregation to approach him. And she found out that he was sleeping with a lot of these women.
Wow.
And when she would speak about it to him, he began to beat her badly, to the point where she would miss some days in church, and then people would ask about her, and then she'd find herself having to make up excuses. And so she said she had talked to some of the elders, the women in the church, and her words was that no one believed her. Like, how dare her try to shame the pastor? And so she just felt like she didn't have any help. And so basically she went in hiding, and she was in California with her child, with the clothes on her back, in hiding, and trying to figure out her next move. And it just really stood out to me. I mean, there was several stories that stood out to me, but that story just reinforced that, there may be times when you feel you have to get out, and you might disclose this information to some people, and it may not be the right people. So it's important, when you're deciding to leave, that importance of coming up with that safety plan, that
absolutely,
and researching it and what that might look like. And I think now more so than then. There's a lot of sites, there's a lot of resources. You still have to be careful because we know that the times when women in particular are most vulnerable and lives are lost is when they're trying to leave.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
We know that to be true. So that saying that there has to be a plan if all possible. And if not, you have to dial 911.
Mm.
You have to dial it if it's right in the middle of everything,
And I'm glad that you brought that up because, the statement is so true, which we've heard, whether it was in a movie or in our professional life, wherever. If I can't have you, nobody can have you. And that is a very real statement.
Yeah.
And you're very right. Majority of the time, the statistics say it's when the victim is about to leave. And like you said, sometimes you just have a plan, 2:00 in the morning. I know he's about to be home around 5 in the morning because he works. You grab the kids, whether you can't find anything but, like you said, just the clothes that's on your back, and you leave and you don't look back. Because again, these abusers are the type that, let's just say you Google, resources for social work of trying to get help, and then they get home and they're looking at your history and they see those resources, and then who's going to get hurt? You know what I mean? So it's very important, whether it's talking to somebody at the grocery store, at Target, like, look, this is what's going on. This is, the time to meet, the place that we can meet up, because again, it's all that fear of what's going to happen to me and or our children if he finds out or she finds out of what's going on.
Yeah. And I want to kind of jump a little bit before that, because I think sometimes we can think in extremes, either I'm staying or I'm going. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's, for a lot of victims of domestic violence, IPV, whatever you want to call it, that in between stage where I feel like I want to go, but I'm not quite ready. Mm-hmm. And there could still be a safety plan in that, whether it's you kind of know what the cycle is. So either, you're locking yourself in the bathroom when it's about to rev up, but there's other ways to make sure that you're staying safe, right, even as you're deciding. And I don't want it to be so black and white where, because a lot of people, they're not there yet. Mm-hmm. And they're still trying to figure it out, and resources and all that stuff may not be readily available, but just making a plan on how to stay safe, even if you're deciding to stay in the relationship. Again, is that locking myself in the bathroom? Is that going to a friend's house? Is that whatever that thing is having your supports is highly, highly, highly encouraged, because we need to have people where we feel safe. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of wanted to add that piece too, for those that are listening that are in that in between, they're in that gray. Mm-hmm. You could still have a safety plan for yourself while you're in it. Mm-hmm.
And majority of the time too, it's like, what I've learned in my professional realm is that the person is afraid to leave because there's kids involved. So it's more of, okay, well, what's going to happen? What are my kids going to think when I leave their father? Are they going to think I'm a bad mother? Are they going to think something like, well, daddy, this is what mommy said last night. So, again, I think it's important to even say to not judge that man or woman that is still trying to decide when, where, how to leave. Absolutely. And to have an open ear to listen and not to judge that person. You know what, when you're ready, I'm here for you.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. Absolutely. If I can circle back, because I know you guys were talking about the teenagers. One thing that I think we hear a lot about is gaslighting. Yes. That is definitely another, it's a new more popular term now, but definitely gaslighting. So that is kind of pretty much, in layman's term, is when someone makes you think you're crazy. Mm-hmm. So you can say they told you, F you, I'm leaving you, blah, 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 blah. And you come back and say, and you pack your bags, get ready to go. And they're like, wait, I didn't say that. That's not what I did. Mm-hmm. And I've been in situations, not, a heavily abusive situation, but situation was like, well, did I miss that? Was I not hearing that? But that is a telltale sign when they either call you crazy or they do stuff and then say, no, that didn't happen. That's not what I said. That's not what I did. And you're really starting to question your own mental stability. That is gaslighting.
Gaslighting, yeah.
Yeah,
That is
because
gaslighting.
again, that's questioning your sanity, right? Like,
Absolutely.
I swear I did not say that to you. And because they're mentally ill, and that's okay to say, right? Like, it's not, I think, again, that's why we're on this show, to break the stigma, because a lot of times people say, oh, well, why would you say he's mentally ill? Well, again, because of what he or she is doing, right? Psychologically, financially, physically, where they are trying to manipulate and control that other person because of how they see themselves. You know, it's how they perceive themselves. And so many times when you've been abused, it's easier to put it off on somebody else than to look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, I need some help. So a lot of times, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, they'll put it off on somebody else.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, like, you know, yeah, there are some examples, you know, when people have some mental illnesses or some concerns, but there are some people who are just jerks. There are some people who are just unkind. There are some people
might be a little narcissistic or antisocial in there.
That's what I was thinking.
If we want to give them a label, and those people do exist, but there are plenty of people who would not, you know, be diagnosed as narcissistic and things like that. But they're just jerks. They're unkind individuals, and you know, they're angry about something, and they, you know, and they just want to project their anger onto somebody else, you know. So I mean,
No, I think another thing that's important to address as well, ladies, is the sexual abuse. So, you know, I know that I went to a conference when I was in DC about domestic violence, and one thing that was addressed is, you know, well, my husband wants to have sex with me all the time, and I don't want to have sex. Like, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. You know, I was dealing with the kids all day, and there's been times where, you know, they will abuse their wife and they're raping her. Like, I don't, and they're forcing themselves on their spouse. And many a times women could be like, oh, that wasn't rape, like, that's my husband. But no, like, if he, whether he's your husband or not, is forcing himself on you, and you're telling him, no, I don't want it, and he's forcing it, it's rape. And we talked a lot about this in one of the workshops, is that, you know, women could be embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it. You know, they could be in denial. No, my husband's not doing that. When in reality, that is sexual abuse. And again, it's referred to any type of behavior that uses sex to control or demean the victim. So I think that's important to say as well.
And also, and considering sexual abuse, another thing could be like having sex and your partner is harming you while you're having sex. And that can be choking you, hitting you, throwing you to the ground. You know, the media really likes to get into this, throwing you on tables and, you know, things like that. But if you're not consenting, if that's not how you want to be treated during a sexual act, that can be abused. Forcing you to watch pornography. That's not what you want to do. Again, it's that power control, forcing you to do something you don't want to do.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up choking, because that is, whew. So I just want to add to that, with choking, it increases the risk of a fatality. Not only like if you're being choked and let's say you walk away and you don't have any symptoms, you're not, you know, at the moment you don't feel like anything's happening to you, you could still be at risk of dying 2 weeks later because of the amount of oxygen that you lost during that experience. So it's really, really, there's all kinds of, I mean, I can't get into the technical things of it, but we had a training and all kinds of, like, you know, if you have like some things in your eye after an incident, like that's a sign that you need to go get checked on. And police are being trained. Yeah. Police are being trained on how to like look for those things. There could be fragments in your neck that could be dislodged. It's such a dangerous thing. And again, it just increases your risk of being in a fatal and of being killed. You know, the closer that you get to those kinds of behaviors.
And I think just
So.
for people to know as well, every 20 minutes, someone is being abused. Every 20
Wow.
minutes. Mhm.
Wow.
And that's abuse across the board, different types
Across
of
the board. So whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, financial, every 20 minutes.
Sure.
Wow.
Mhm.
The numbers are crazy. I want to just call out some other types of abuse.
Absolutely. Sorry.
There's some no, be sorry, no, you're fine. Reproductive coercion. So it was interesting as I read this title because it was like, okay, wait a minute, let's talk about this.
Wow.
Some examples of reproductive coercion is refusing when your partner refuses to wear a condom as a method of birth control, and that's something that the other partner does not want.
Wow.
And absolutely refuse it. You know, that could be a form of abuse. Let's see, sabotaging birth control. Now, we've all seen movies and things where, you know, you see like a woman is sticking the pin in the condom and, you know, or the man takes out certain pills, birth control pills. That can also be considered a form of abuse. Forcing a person, a woman to become pregnant and she doesn't want to be pregnant. You know, for whatever the reason is, you know, the male may decide, I want you to be pregnant right now, or I want another child. And the woman's like, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
But forcing her to become pregnant, forcing the person to have an abortion. And they don't want to have one.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, those are all forms of abuse.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those.
I had someone ask, and so I think we all know the answer to this, but I'm going to kick it out there. Can men experience domestic violence?
Definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think most of the forms we've talked about, men can experience. Most of them, you know.
Yeah, they're just underreported, just like rape, and you know, they're just underreported.
Yeah.
I had, you know, even in my DV group, you know, the men would share the relationships that they were in,
Sure.
and you know, their partners, and even, you know, the women would share the things that they did. Like I said, there were women groups for abusers as well, and their partners were men or women, depending on, you know, who they were with. But there were classes for women who were abusing their male partners. And again, like, you know, throwing things at them. I had a case where a woman went after her partner with a knife and launched a knife at him as he was trying to leave the house. And so, I mean, it goes both ways. It's just underreported, again, with the whole machismo and things like that.
Absolutely. And a couple of things that come to mind, I actually remember having a therapy session for a couple. The wife was ordered to address anger management in therapy. And so they actually came to therapy because of court order. Okay. And she a few times, but she got so angry in the session one time at him that she stood up and said, I should bless you in your mouth. I mean, she was on him, and you know, and this is a session. I'm just like, hold up.
What was going on in the home? Like, she was that bold to say it.
And so,
session.
I mean, she was gonna hit him, you know, and this is a big old guy, and this is a small little woman. So anything she was doing to him, you know, is because he was allowing it. He didn't want to hit her, you know. And I pretty much had to threaten her and said, you touch him in here, I'm calling 911. It's just no way around it. It's not going to happen. So I was able to kind of implement humor into the particular session, and it ended okay. And one other thing too, I took a domestic violence training. It was like this extremely extensive training, like 40-hour training. And at one point we had some panel members and some panel people come to share some stories. And speaking of men who can be abused, this young brother, he was there. And he was open about the abuse that he was receiving. And some of the things he said, and I think, you know, it's familiar to us. It took him a while to speak up because he's a man. And he didn't want to look like a punk and look weak. And he mentioned a couple of times he had called the police because his lady was hitting on him and stuff. And basically the police, they were laughing at him, saying, you can't handle this. Like, I don't believe you actually caused it. He just felt really awful. However, when they had children, that's when it turned, because what he said is that he realized that his lady's anger and behaviors was going to probably lead her to jail. You know, something's not going to pan out right. So he had to be the healthy parent. He had to be around. And he said when he knew that he really had to get some legal help and what have you, I think she tried to set him on fire because she was mad. She was mad. And he got a lot of support, you know, from an organization in particular here in San Diego that support men. He was able to get legal counsel and support, and he got custody of the children and got up out of there.
Good for him. And
so he made it a point to lend his voice to groups and panels so we can see men who are also experiencing this, to encourage men, regardless of people laughing at them or what have you.
Absolutely.
To speak up and protect themselves and to be there for their children.
That's really sad, because again, like when it comes to like, you know, the culture of men is very, like you said, like that machismo, if you're, you know, Latino or Hispanic, or, you know, it's like whether you're, I think just across the field, you don't want to feel embarrassed. You're the man that's supposed to be, you know, this protector of your family. You know, you can't show your weakness, but it's not okay. Like you cannot, you know, feed into somebody's weakness, even as a man, and take advantage of that. Like it's just not okay. And then, like you said, for them to laugh and to say, "Oh, you're the man." Like, what do you mean she was beating up on you? And what do you mean she's saying this and this? Like they really need to take men more seriously when it comes to abuse. I was watching one documentary, and there are, I mean, I would think that we would need more groups, but there are male groups that were victims of abuse. And the one that I saw, it was like 5 or 6 of them. They were like huddled together like this, and they were just like screaming and crying. The therapist was like, just let it all out. And these grown men allowed themselves to be vulnerable and to cry and to scream, you know, whatever they wanted to do to get it out, and then to share amongst these, you know, amongst each other, the abuse that they that happened to them. And it's so important to have that outlet and to have that support, whether you're a male or a female. At the end of the day, it's just not okay.
Absolutely. And I want to jump back to Maritza. You were saying when Lucretia was in her session about like she had the audacity. And if you could think about it, what we witness is a watered down version of what happens at home.
Absolutely.
So if that's what she's bringing to, one is telling you that she's not in control of her emotions.
Right. Yeah.
That she had lost so much control that it didn't even matter where she was.
Right.
But also that it's probably 20 times worse when they're at home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what stood out to me as you were telling me that story. Like, wow, like it's even that much greater.
Absolutely. And she was angry because he was disclosing, you know, how she acts at home, their experiences, you know, and she'd gone to jail before.
Wow.
Because, you know, she was throwing things up and he refused. She wanted him to hit her and he said he would refuse. He refused to do it. And he called 911. Police came and he said they laughed at him. But because of all the damage to their home, they had to remove somebody. And he clearly had, you know, things torn on him, clothes torn, you know, and scratches and stuff on him. And so they had to take her. But he was laughed at, you know. But yeah, absolutely.
If I could just address one last thing, I know we just have maybe like 15, 20 more minutes. But I think it's important to talk about the cycle of abuse and what that looks like, if that's okay, ladies.
Absolutely.
So the first thing that happens, and again, this is just through, you know, statistics, research amongst our profession. But the first one is tension building. So tensions increase, they break down of communication, victim becomes fearful, as well as feels the need to keep the abuser safe. So like whatever you want, you know, like, you know, I'm so sorry that I didn't put the dishes away the way that you wanted, or I'm so sorry that, you know, I didn't cook the meal that you want, the certain type of way that you wanted me to cook your meal. And it's like trying to please that abuser because they know what that next step is going to be.
Right.
So again, you kind of said it well on it, like that narcissism, like I'm God, I'm king, I'm, supposed to be your whole universe. And they take advantage of the victim in that way. Mm-hmm. So again, that tension is building up, whether it's a raise of his voice, whether it's the raise of his hands, right? And then the second thing is the incident. So that's when it comes, majority of the time, it comes from a verbal, emotional to now it's physical. Now they're putting hands on their victim. So again, that's the arguing, the blaming, the physical abuse. And it's a little bit even of threats. If you don't make my dinner this way again, I'm gonna put you out of the house. Then you better find somewhere to live for the night. Or you said you're gonna take our son to school and he was 2 minutes late. You're gonna get yours when you get home. So again, there's a lot of threats, and it can be that financial threat, right? Like, oh, I gave you $100. You don't know how to behave. Well, I'm gonna take that $100 back from you. So again, it all goes back to that control. And then again, the third step is the abuser apologizes. So that could be, baby, I had a long day. I'm stressed out. The money's funny right now. Like, I really love you. So, that abuser sometimes is like, oh yeah, that's right. So again, it's psychological. It's trying to get into that victim's head by allowing him or her to think, oh, well, maybe, he did hit me because he was stressed out, and trying to make excuses for what had happened. Again, so that's blaming the victim sometimes, or even, again, making excuses of why he or she is hitting or hurting that person. And then the fourth is the calm before the storm again. So what this looks like is the abuser is bringing him or her flowers, making her favorite meals, taking her to her special, dinner, her special restaurants that she likes to go, or her favorite restaurant that she likes to go to. So now the abuser's like, well, maybe I shouldn't leave. Like, now he's nice to me again. He's buying me flowers. He's taking me out. But again, that's all in that psychological abuse, knowing, okay, now that she thinks everything's fine, and then he gets triggered, or she gets triggered, and then it starts all over again.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mauricia. Yeah, it's important to know, those cycles, and I think, people who experience are currently experiencing DV, I think you could probably relate. And if you tracked back, the instances that you've had with your partner, whether it's a male or a female, because I definitely want to make sure that we are being clear that women can also be abusers and are also abusers, but knowing what that cycle looks like, and knowing that, that cycle is going to continue. Another thing that's super important, just to make sure, and I know we're all on the same page, is this is not going to change without intervention. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what, I've heard, well, it'll get better when we move here. It'll get better when he gets a job. It'll get better. The power and control have nothing to do with it'll get better when. It has to do with those behaviors and that anxiety that makes me want to control everything. It has to do with that unresolved trauma. It has to do with me not knowing how to manage my anger and my emotions. It has to do with so many other things, substance abuse, so many other things that a different location, a different experience, a different situation is not going to change it. It does not change without intervention. So,
no, I'm glad that you brought that up, because sometimes the victim can be like, well, maybe I need to be, and again, that may be that gaslighting, but it's like, maybe if I was a better mother to our children, or maybe if I was a better wife, he'll change. But at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with you. You know what I mean? Like, it's their conscious or subconscious issues that they didn't want to deal with. And again, instead of, like I like to say, instead of feeling comfortable being uncomfortable, to get the healing, to learn how to manage your emotions, to learn how to cope with your childhood trauma, that takes that person to say, you know what, it's me, which it could take years, months, however, and I need to get help. But again, it's up to that abuser to recognize it and to take that first step to say, you know what, I need to get some help. Like this is affecting my marriage, it's affecting my family. And it's time for me to really just look outside of myself and get that help.
So abuse on any level is not okay. Any type of, it's not okay. And if you find yourself in a situation where you are being abused, no, you know, it doesn't mean that it was your fault, but at some point you got to get to the point where you want to help yourself. And I'm hoping that us discussing these things, you know, maybe you've heard something you've never heard before, or maybe a light bulb goes off because you have heard it before. And it's about if you see yourself in this position, or you know someone who is doing something about it, and that's something. It's a wide span of something. Like Rolanda was saying, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're running, but you maybe just be protecting yourself at that particular time. But something has to be done. There has to be some type of intervention, and the intervention may start with you helping yourself on some level.
Definitely. Because, you know, again, it affects your mental health. You know, so many times we've heard in our profession, or even in our personal life that we may know, you know, within the abuse, you know, you may have PTSD, you know what I mean? To the point where the next relationship you go into, he or she could be a great person, but, you know, maybe the slamming of the door, or maybe, you know, the tone of the voice of getting raised can allow you to be triggered to feel like he or she is going to hurt you. As well as it can affect your anxiety. You can, you know, give you depression. And just, you know, it's really important to get the help if you can, to really break down that hurt and pain that you went through.
Yeah, and one other thing too, I just want to say, sometimes it's difficult for some people to help themselves, you know, and if you need to look at your children to get that strength, do that. Yeah. Because our children are with us, our children observe us. We are teaching our children, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, how to love and how to be loved. You know, what's okay, you know, what to accept and what have you. They're watching us, you guys, and we don't want to repeat these cycles.
Right.
We don't want to repeat these cycles. No one would want their children or any other loved one to have to experience any form of abuse. And so, you know, we have to do for ourselves. I mean, in the process of protecting them, protect ourselves.
Definitely.
So, again, I know I said there's a lot of different resources out there. There really are. One of the resources we have shared in the past, and that's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And I know we've had it on the site before. Will we have it on the site again? Can we
Yeah, I have the number. And,
yeah.
So the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 800-799-SAFE, and that is 7233. So again, that's 800-799-7233. And again, you know, this is for somebody that knows someone, you know, whether it's a colleague, a family member, a friend, that you're hearing this, like, you know what, I remember him saying this, or I remember her saying this, or I noticed something was going on, you know, the last time I visited this person. And, you know, definitely, if anything, try to pull them aside. And again, I think another key thing is to, even if you have to have a code word, you know, when you're talking to somebody over the phone, and if they say that word, then you know, you can make that decision to call 911 for that person, or even that hotline number that we just shared.
Absolutely.
So I think that is that. Did we have any other questions, Rolanda? Okay.
No.
Well, thank you everybody for this show. I'm super excited, actually. I know the three of us are really excited for our next show. So we are going to have a guest speaker, and we're going to be talking about sex trafficking, and what that looks like during COVID. As well as, you know, what are the signs, as well as how these abusers, or, you know, however the word that you want to call them, pimps or abusers, are using social media now to try to get young kids as young as 8, 9 years old to traffic them. And again, like we know here in San Diego, we have Tijuana, which is literally down the street. You know, it could be literally, depending on where you live in San Diego, 5 minutes away, it could be walking distance or 30 minutes away. So we are super excited for our next topic. Again, it's about to educate others, to inform others about sex trafficking, of course, within the US, but specifically more in Los Angeles and San Diego with a great guest speaker. So definitely stay tuned to that.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yes. Have a good evening.